I'm Katie Jeffries, and this is Unsolved.
This is a First Coast News special presentation, Unsolved. Here's First Coast News investigator, Katie Jeffries.
Crime shows make it seem so easy. There's a murder, there's an investigation, an arrest, and a sentencing, and it's all wrapped up in a 60-minute episode. But real murder investigations are much more complicated than that. They can be lengthy, and sometimes they don't end with an arrest. And for families, that is a completely different type of pain when they realize their loved one's case has gone cold. In the United States, there's an estimated 200,000 or more unsolved murder cases since the 1960s. In Duval County, more than 1,400 unsolved murder cases since the 1930s. That's why I began this series 2 years ago, to spotlight local cold cases that maybe have not been in the public in years or even decades, to try and help give those families answers. So tonight, we're going to be sharing some of those stories with you, because maybe you could be the key to catching a killer. We begin with the murder of Deborah Lynn O'Quinn. She had been car shopping that day with her father, Walter. He dropped her off at her South Side apartment, watched her walk inside, turn on the lights, and waved to him that everything was fine. Her father drove away, not knowing that was the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. Her disappearance gripped the newspaper headlines. What happened to 18-year-old Deborah Lynn O'Quinn? On the microfilm at the Jacksonville Public Library, in the harsh black and white, there emerges article after article retelling a brutal story. Sergeant Dan Jansen with the Cold Case Unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says the morning after Walter dropped off Deborah, her roommate came home.
And when she walks into the apartment, this is around 9 a.m. in the morning, she sees her brother asleep. When I say her brother, I'm referring to the roommate's brother, asleep on the couch. And she awakens him and says, "Hey, where's Deborah?" And he said, "Well, she's not here. I haven't seen her."
But Sergeant Jansen says what was even more disturbing, there was a lot of blood around the apartment.
On her bed, in the bathroom, there's some smears on the wall, there's some blood on the carpet. So of course she gets really inquisitive with her brother, and he basically discounts it and said he thought maybe there was an accident or something happened in the apartment.
Sergeant Jansen has asked us not to name Deborah's roommate or her brother due to the reopened investigation. When Deborah didn't show up for work that morning, she was reported missing and the search began. Detectives knew by the amount of blood something far worse than an accident had occurred. And then came a break. They found a witness, a woman who lived across the courtyard who thought she'd heard a woman scream in the night.
Got up, looked out the window, and she saw a lot of activity in Deborah's apartment. She said all the lights were on, and she said there was a male that was walking throughout the apartment. She sees him actually leave the apartment and go down to a pickup truck. He was carrying something. She said he was carrying it like a tire, but it wasn't round like a tire.
Detectives believe it was Deborah's body, but the witness, unsure of what she saw, didn't call police. Jansen says officers confiscated a knife from the roommate's brother's car.
It was tested microscopically, and there was evidence of bone being on the serrated edge of this knife. However, they could not say there was not enough of the evidence there to 100% identify it as a human or belonging to Deborah.
He says that though detectives at the time were suspicious of the brother's story, they found another piece of evidence, a palm print in Deborah's room that didn't match the roommate's brother or anyone in their investigation so far.
Did that occur at the time of the murder, that palm print, or was it from a previous visit, or we don't know.
Then in December of 1979, Deborah's body was finally found, heavily decomposed in the woods off Mount Pleasant Road, and it confirmed detectives' suspicions. She had been stabbed to death. A few years later came a big twist. Serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to Deborah's killing. He was well known for multiple killings in the South and had spent time in Jacksonville, but was also known to exaggerate.
He was notoriously known for many, many murders, or many that he admitted to. Some of them that he tried to admit to, he wasn't involved in, and this is one of those type cases.
Detectives determined Lucas's confession was a lie. The case grew cold as the years, then decades passed. Walter died in 1996 without an answer about who killed his daughter. But detectives say this case isn't over. They still have evidence and blood kept from Deborah's apartment, all things they can now run through DNA testing.
I'm hoping that the person involved in this has thought that they're very comfortable with what they've done and gotten away with it, that they may have spoken to somebody or mentioned it or talked about it. And if they have, by all means, contact us at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office or our partners at Crime Stoppers.
And hopefully bring justice to whomever viciously ended Deborah's life that stormy night in 1979. Enduring the murder of a loved one is something that will absolutely change a person's life. That loss can be crushing. A local Jacksonville man took his pain and channeled it into creating a first-of-its-kind database specifically to highlight cold cases, a way to connect witnesses with law enforcement. Ryan Backman never expected unsolved murders would become his life's work. But in 2009, his father, Clifford, was murdered at a construction site off Bonneville Road in Jacksonville. Clifford had taken the extra work to help pay for the medical costs of his wife, Jane, who was battling cancer. He was shot and robbed, and his case remains unsolved. So Ryan began Project Cold Case.
It would give families a place to go to know that someone cared about their loved one and that their loved one's information was out there.
A site dedicated to unsolved murders and includes a public searchable database of unsolved murders. The goal is to connect witnesses or those with information to law enforcement.
And they may have information on those cases. They may just not know that it was unsolved.
He also works to publicize the cases, especially through social media, to remind families they are not forgotten, but also, hopefully, to get an arrest.
There's a killer on the street. There's somebody out there that committed this crime that has not been held accountable. And that person could be behind your father or daughter in line at the bank. They could be behind you at the grocery store. They could live next door to your child's bus stop. It's also a public safety issue.
So for the next hour, we are going to continue to spotlight unsolved murders because you could be the key to helping solve one. When we come back, a look at a case that shook Clay County in 1990.
Coming up, a young woman beaten and stabbed to death on a dark, desolate road. Her body found days later.
You gotta think, who knew to put her there?
Could her killer still be on the First Coast? After the break.
It's a case that has gripped Middleburg for more than 2 decades. Multiple investigators with the Clay County Sheriff's Office have worked on this case, but still no arrests have been made in the brutal killing of Terrell Orcutt. In these boxes at the Clay County Sheriff's Office lies the story of Terrell Orcutt. It begins on January 21st, 1990, early in the morning.
She was heading home about 4:30 in the morning from Jacksonville to Middleburg.
But she never made it. A man on his way to work found her car on the side of County Road 218. Door open, driver's side window down, and the engine still running. He went to the nearest store to call police. Terrell's purse was still on the driver's seat with her money and wallet untouched. Then the first break. People in a house just 500 feet from where her car was found told authorities they heard something strange early that morning.
2 people heard a female saying, "I didn't do it, I didn't do it," and then heard a car pull off.
But what could that mean? And where was Terrell?
Investigation started as a missing persons.
Searches were formed, and the area around 218 was combed by investigators and volunteers. But just 7 days later, the case would turn from a missing person to a murder investigation.
Her body was found 50 feet off of this dirt road in a wooded area.
Not covered or hidden, but dumped in the tree line off Lee Road, less than 4 miles from where her car was found.
There was 2 stab wounds to the chest, and she had a broken clavicle on her left side.
Terrell's sister, Cheryl Turner, remembers the moment her mother got the news.
She didn't change, she just grabbed a sweater and her nightgown and took off up there.
They were met by the sheriff and a preacher that told them, Terrell, whose life was on the upswing, young, ambitious, about to be promoted at SunTrust Bank, her life had been viciously ended. The investigation began, first by looking at how her Thunderbird was found and her injuries. With the driver's side window down, could her broken clavicle be from someone reaching through the window and violently pulling her out? And why was she on 218 in the first place? Her sister says her route home should have been 295 to 103rd, then south on County Road 217. And what about those words? "I didn't do it," witnesses heard. Was she being pulled over?
The investigators worked that angle very hard and came up with no information that would lead that it was a law enforcement officer.
And where her body was found on Lee Road, a dirt road that just connects back to Blanding.
You got to think, who knew to put her there? So someone, was familiar with the area.
Over the decades, numerous investigators have looked over this case, adding on to the already large case file. Detective Rob Schoonover says there have been a lot of persons of interest, but no specific suspects. And Terrell's family is continuing their fight for justice, no matter how difficult it seems.
My mother died of cancer before she got her answers. And I promised her while she was going through her treatment that I would push this. And I'm pushing it. But I'm not getting nowhere.
But between Terrell stopping in that dark area, her purse being left untouched, and the stabbing of a petite young woman, the location of her body, Cheryl thinks her sister knew her killer.
In my opinion, it was personal, very personal.
And the decades have not eased the still very raw pain of losing her sister. She still keeps Terrell's hope chest filled with pictures and tapes, the little things that remind her of her little sister.
It hurts like hell. She's been dead 28 years. She's only been alive 26 years. So it's a crying shame that your murder goes unsolved longer than you've been alive.
But Detective Schoonover has been going through this case piece by piece and firmly believes the truth is out there.
Someone back there in 1990, you commit a murder, you don't keep quiet. You tell somebody. Somebody knows. And all these years, the family going through this, that it's going to take someone to step up and make that phone call.
A call that would finally answer the question, who murdered Terrell Orcutt? Often when we talk about cold cases, we mention evidence being retested. So we wanted to show you how that is being done, because technological advances as well as genealogy sites are changing the game when it comes to testing cold cases. So we got a rare look inside a laboratory in South Florida that specifically tests evidence in older unsolved murders. Cold cases are like a puzzle, piecing together information and leads. For DNA analysts, it all begins with one question. Does the original evidence still exist?
Everything changes so often in forensic science that something that wasn't suitable for testing 3 years ago might be perfect for testing now.
Rachel Afline is the senior DNA analyst for DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, a private DNA laboratory that works with law enforcement, attorneys, and cold case initiatives. She says the game changer in the field of DNA analysis came from lower-level DNA testing, meaning analysts can get results from a smaller sample.
Things that were previously not detected as even containing DNA or had lower levels that we thought weren't suitable for testing, now we can go back and test because our testing is so much more sensitive.
Including picking up DNA off of shell casings, something unheard of just a few years ago. And the development of the MVAC, which can pull DNA off of something the suspect may have just touched, like clothing or hair. Allison Nunes, the chief operating officer, says it comes down to what evidence is still available and the best route to test it.
We worked a lot of cold cases where we use 5 of the new technologies that we have. I mean, there's lots of different types of evidence and each one could require something new.
Once they get that DNA, the FBI DNA database, CODIS, used to be the only route to test it for a hit. But now with the public inputting their own DNA into genealogy databases, it opens it up to a much wider search.
That's where we're looking at larger databases like GEDmatch, which has taken database profiles that were uploaded by individuals who use private DNA testing, and that can identify a large amount of people in the United States by looking at their family members. So they build out possible family trees for this unknown individual and use those leads to do research to try to identify the John or Jane Doe or maybe the suspect in a case.
Nunes and Afline say their lab is deeply personal. They want to help catch a killer and give families closure. They say technological advances mean families should never give up hope. But sometimes with cold cases, solutions take time.
Sometimes we say, let's wait. Let's see if something else comes out. Or if we did hear about a better technology that may be coming in the future, let's wait on that. Because it is a cold case, and you might only have one shot. So you want to make sure that shot is the answer.
So as much as time can be the enemy of murder investigations, it can also be the ally. Technology will continue to improve and hopefully bring families justice.
Coming up, the night before Halloween becomes a true nightmare. A father murdered inside his own store, and police believe he knew his killer.
My belief is that they would not have kept quiet. They would have said something to someone.
Plus, a young mother's body found inside a Riverside apartment. 2 decades later, her daughter wants to know who did it when Unsolved returns.
It was the night before Halloween in 2001. Cleo Aska told his wife that he was going to run up to his store to get a key and check the back door locks. The next morning, he was found dead inside his Arlington store. And that key and the door locks could help point investigators towards his killer. Time has changed the building sitting at the corner of University and Windermere in Arlington. Renovations, different stores, different people. But the image of this building, surrounded by yellow crime scene tape, will forever be frozen in time for those that knew Cleo Aska. He owned Spiritual Heights, which sold clothing and records. He was also a husband and father of 2 young boys.
He was discovered about 8:30 in the morning by friends of his who were coming to the store who had not seen him from the evening before.
Shot and killed. Halloween Day had become a true nightmare. Cleo's widow, Kyra, has since moved to Atlanta, but spoke with us via Skype. She remembers arriving at his store that morning.
I'm watching the police officers turn cars around, but then when my car comes up to the yellow tape, they lift it up. At that point, my heart sank because I knew.
She says Cleo had just put in a new back door to be up to regulation and left home around 9:30 p.m.
So he just was like, I'm just gonna go up there, get the key, lock the back door, and I'll be back.
And that was the last time she ever saw him.
And he was discovered inside that building. He had been shot and killed. And one of the interesting factors in that is that the business was locked from the inside.
Cleo killed, yet all the doors were locked. No forced entry, no attempted robbery. One other possible factor, detectives did find marijuana at the scene.
The investigation later revealed that there had been some drug transactions that had gone on.
With all those factors, cold case detectives strongly believe Cleo knew his killer. This was not a random attack. Cleo Aska was only 25 years old, but he had already accomplished many of his dreams. He had worked hard for years to get the money to open his own store, but his greatest joy in life, his 2 sons, Jabari and Ajani. Kyra says he loved being with his sons and had a giving heart, and Ajani remembers how his dad could make the class laugh.
He just brought like joy to even the kids that really didn't even know who he was.
We went with Sergeant Dan Jansen and Detective Ray Reeves with JSO's cold case unit back to the scene. They say reopening the case with fresh eyes could create new leads. And they say they do have an eye on a person of interest in this case.
Cleo probably knew who his killer was, and so that's a huge factor.
They say they are taking evidence from the scene 16 years ago and taking another look at it through modern DNA advancements. And as time passes, people can get comfortable. They believe whomever killed Cleo has likely told someone.
My belief is that they would not have kept quiet. They would have said something to someone, and maybe some of those people aren't the best of friends anymore, or maybe not in a relationship anymore, and we'd love to hear from them.
Kyra says whomever took Cleo's life inside here in 2001 also took away the chance for him to build a lifetime of memories with his sons.
It's been a long 16 years, long. And I have been his voice to make people remember him. And for someone to come forward, because they took a lot from me. They took a lot from his children.
And that leads us to the death of Valerie Ames. She was brutally murdered inside of a Riverside apartment. Her daughter, Michelle, was just 5 years old at the time, and for more than 2 decades, she has wondered who killed her mother. These photographs, spread across a table, are all Michelle James has to remember her mother, Valerie Ames. A woman that loved riding horses and camping, but most of all, loved her children.
I was only 5, so I don't remember a whole lot, but I do know that she was about her children. That was her life.
Her sister was 9, Michelle only 5, but Michelle remembers her final moments with her mother at a birthday party.
I was on her lap, you know. It was Barney. I was little, and that was my last time I've seen my mom.
After that, old newsreels tell the story. It was August 10th, 1996. Valerie's body was found inside the Courtyard Apartments on King Street in Riverside. But the apartment was not hers.
The gentleman that was renting the apartment was actually incarcerated the night before Miss Ames was recovered.
Detective Harmony Brooks with the Cold Case Unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says their timeline rules out the man that leased the apartment. But Detective Brooks says after that man's arrest, the apartment was left unlocked. Inside, it was a gruesome crime scene. At 31 years old, Valerie Ames had been stabbed and beaten to death. The murder weapon would never be recovered. Interviews were done, evidence gathered, and leads followed. Detective Brooks has the original case file of around 500 pages. But in time, the case went cold. Stabbings, though, are a personal, close contact crime, which gives Detective Brooks hopes that maybe traces of Valerie's killer were left behind.
Right now what we're concentrating on is the evidence inside the crime scene and the fact that we're 22 years later with greater DNA technology.
With more than 30 pieces of evidence that they can retest for DNA, Detective Brooks is officially reopening this case, something Michelle and her family have always wanted. She says the years have done nothing to numb the pain of losing her mother so violently.
My mom could not be there when I had my babies. My grandmother had to live the rest of her life knowing she buried her daughter.
After more than 20 years, all they want is an answer about who took the life of a young mother in Riverside in 1996.
Help us get a name. Help us end this battle that we've been fighting for so long.
Coming up, it was the summer of '74. 5 little girls go missing within 3 months. Was it all connected or coincidence? A look at the cases that still remain unsolved after the break.
For the second half of Unsolved, we're taking a look at something strange that was happening in Jacksonville in 1974. Little girls were going missing, 5 in just 3 months. But now, more than 4 decades later, detectives are looking at these cases again, trying to see if maybe some of them could be solved. The disappearances began on July 21st, 1974. 9-year-old Jean Marie Schoen was known as a feisty little girl who often went by the nickname Jeannie. On the day she disappeared, she was sent to the corner store to pick up a pack of cigarettes, a normal errand for a child in the 1970s. But somewhere between her home and the store, she vanished. It was meant to be a short errand. The corner store was just a few blocks from Jeannie's Springfield home. Detectives established Jeannie did make it to that store and bought the cigarettes, but then forgot them on the counter when she left to go to a nearby place called The Hangout to play pinball, but was shooed away by the owner.
He tells her, when we open for business, the floors are dry, you can come back and you can play pinball. He says he never sees her again.
From there, the corner store owner says she returned, picked up the forgotten cigarettes, and left. And that is the last confirmed sighting of the little girl. Sergeant Dan Jansen with the Cold Case Unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says Jeannie's case file is filled with interviews from people who thought they saw something strange that day. But there is one story that stood out to detectives back then and today. 2 girls named Vanessa and Lori say Jeannie was with them at a laundromat when a white man with light-colored hair on a blue bike came inside and grabbed Jeannie and pulled her into a restroom.
They were in the bathroom a short time, and he reappears with her that she was crying, and they asked again what was going on, and he says, again, mind your own business.
The girls told police the man left with Jeannie on his bike. But there is a red flag raised in Sergeant Jansen's mind about this story. For a feisty little girl who knew not to go anywhere with strangers, Vanessa and Lori never say that Jeannie screamed or tried to fight the man.
There might be the assumption that she knew of him, whether it was an acquaintance, a neighbor, or something like that.
The reports say Jeannie wasn't a runaway child. She had a loving home and followed the rules. So police suspected foul play.
Canvases, talking to the people in the neighborhood, because the level of accountability was much stronger back then.
But lead after lead turned up nothing. Her mother, Pam, now deceased, took out ads in the paper describing her anguish in waiting with no answers. She's quoted in the Jacksonville Journal 17 days after Jeannie disappeared.
The waiting is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, and the fact that there are no leads, which could be good or could be bad. But a little girl doesn't just vanish.
But Jeannie's disappearance would be the beginning of a strange pattern of vanishings.
When you have 5 girls that are missing in 3 months' time, when was the last time that happened? It doesn't happen.
Only 2 bodies would eventually be found. Jeannie nor her remains were ever recovered. But now, more than 4 decades later, cold case detectives are taking a closer look at what happened to those little girls in the summer of '74. It was just 11 days after Jeannie Schoen went missing, August 1st, 1974. Sisters Annette and Millette Anderson vanished from their Ocean Way home. Their father told investigators that when he arrived home that day, he could tell things were out of place, and the little girls were nowhere to be found. For decades, their parents held on to the pictures.
Baby pictures, school pictures.
School report cards from Sheffield Elementary.
Odds and ends of different things.
And until their dying days, Jack and Elizabeth Anderson lived in the same house with the same phone number, just hoping their girls would one day return.
We just went on with life.
They were just 11 and 6 years old. Decades later, the girl's older sister, Donna, remembers the day that her family's entire world changed. She and her mother left the house to go check on a sick family member around 6 p.m. Her father was about to head home after fishing. In the original report, Sergeant Dan Jansen with the Cold Case Unit at JSO says Jack Anderson told officers he called the house around 7 p.m.
It actually speaks with Annette. And he hears the dog barking in the background, and he asks Annette, he says, why is the dog barking? And she said, well, there's some birds in the front yard, and he's barking at these white birds that are in the front yard. And he said, oh, okay. Well, he lets her know that he'll be home shortly.
When he called back 20 minutes later, no answer.
And so we know that our time frame is just a 20-minute window. It's a tight window.
But what happened to these 2 little girls in those crucial 20 minutes?
They just was taken out of the house and gone.
According to reports, there were 2 things that Jack noticed when he got home. First, Millette's baby doll she carried everywhere was also gone. And even stranger and more ominous, The family dog was locked up in a back bedroom, something Donna says her sisters would have never done.
Whoever went in the house had to put the dog in Mama's and Daddy's bedroom because the little dog would eat anybody up.
The dog was known to be protective of the family, especially little Annette.
For that to happen tells us that somebody entered into the home and locked the dog up.
But who? The family house was off of a secluded road.
Whoever took them had to know how to get in and out there because there's only one way in and one way out.
But one neighbor did tell police he thought he saw a strange vehicle that day.
He saw a white vehicle parked in their driveway. He describes it as a sedan type vehicle. He thought maybe like a Thunderbird or a Mustang or something like that, but he really couldn't say exactly what kind of model it was.
With only a few clues to go on, a massive search ensued, 138 square miles, but turned up nothing. Sightings of the girls were called in, but also nothing. The sisters had seemingly vanished into thin air. Then, 4 months later, came a twist. Serial killer Paul John Knowles was killed during an escape attempt in Georgia. But before he died, he left a message for his lawyer detailing his alleged kills, including the murder of 2 little girls.
He made a tape where he had killed 20 people on it, and 2 of them were supposed to have been my sisters.
JSO has a transcript of that recording. Knowles said he dumped the girls' bodies near the end of Commonwealth. Officers searched extensively, but no remains were ever found. Sergeant Jansen says Knowles was known for lying about the number of people he killed to try and shock people.
Now, some of the information that he provided in his transcript does not align to the facts of the case. So that's a little disconcerting as far as his confession is concerned.
So he believes it could be a false confession. Jack and Elizabeth Anderson never saw Annette or Millette again, and no one was ever charged for their disappearance. And those 20 minutes still remain a painful mystery. As investigators looked into the disappearance of Jeannie Schoen and the Anderson sisters, it would be nearly 2 months before another little girl would go missing, and tensions would start to rise.
Coming up.
When they approached the car, they saw a white female in the backseat floorboard of the vehicle. And he basically yells at her, tells her to get down.
Why detectives say it's that case that could hold the key to possibly solving these crimes. Unsolved returns.
Investigators were still looking into the disappearance of Jeannie Schoen and the Anderson sisters when yet another little girl would go missing. Her name was Virginia Helm. But unlike the other cases, this time there would be witnesses, and this time there would be a body found. It was just before 7 p.m. on September 27, 1974, when 12-year-old Virginia Helm was sent to the store to buy some soap. The store just a block away from her home at 1941 Dean Road.
Within 45 minutes of her leaving, her dad went looking for her and was unable to find her.
Sergeant Dan Jansen with the cold case unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office took us back to the scene. He says officers searched the area all around Beach Boulevard and Dean Road, but Virginia had vanished. 3 days after she went missing, there was a break in the case. A couple reported seeing a red VW Bug off the side of New Kings Road near the Duval-Nassau border.
They said when they approached the car, they saw a white female in the backseat floorboard of the vehicle. And he basically yells at her, tells her to get down.
Reading from the original handwritten report, Sergeant Jansen says the couple described a young girl very similar to Virginia.
With her knees in the floorboard, her hands on the rear seat, trying to get up. Looked her in the face, saw her eyes were very large, as if she was frightened, and they were very rapidly looking back and forth, left to right.
But the couple says the girl never screamed for help, and the man jumped into the car and sped off. But in his rush, left something behind.
There's a bag that's knocked out of the vehicle onto the ground, and it was collected and tested for fingerprints back in the day.
But could now be tested for DNA. But there is also another lead. The day before Virginia went missing, another young girl less than a mile away on Glendale Avenue told police a man in a red car had approached her.
basically tried to get her to get into the vehicle, said that they would kill her if she didn't get in, but she didn't fall for it, thank goodness, and she ran for help.
Her name was Mary Ann. She knew Virginia. The two walked to the bus stop together. She told us Virginia kept to herself, but was kind.
You would have never met anybody any sweeter. She was very quiet.
Mary Ann says she felt like the only person who took what happened to her seriously was her mother, until after Virginia went missing the next day.
I remember her looking for the people, going out riding around looking for the vehicle herself. But I do not remember them coming until after Virginia was missing.
The common thread in both leads, the red compact car. Almost a month after Virginia went missing, a couple walking through the woods collecting pine cones made a gruesome discovery.
Virginia Helms was found murdered and buried in the woods near Beechwood and Beach Boulevard.
Shot in the head, wearing only a blouse and partially buried in the dirt, it was confirmation that 12-year-old Virginia Helm had not run away. She had been murdered. The story was now the front page news of the Jacksonville Journal. With multiple other little girls still missing, the wooded area around Beach and Beechwood was searched extensively on foot and by horseback for more graves, but none were found. The investigation grew. More manpower was put towards answering the burning question: what was happening to these little girls? By the time Rebecca Ann Green went missing in October of 1974, it was eerily similar to cases that detectives had seen before. A little girl walking to the store, never to be seen again. But could evidence that a detective tucked into her file back then be used to help solve her case now? When 12-year-old Rebecca Green went missing on October 16th of 1974, an already dire situation became even worse in Jacksonville. The newspaper headlines capturing it all in bold print: 5th in last 3 months. And just like Jeannie Schoen and Virginia Helm before her, Rebecca Green also vanished on the way to the corner store.
That was about 5 blocks from her house. She leaves, she goes to the store, she makes a purchase of some sodas, a couple of them according to the documentation from a clerk.
She left the store and was never seen alive again. When her parents reported her missing, there was a large-scale search, everyone looking for a little girl in a light green dress. Tensions were rising in the community, wanting to know if it was all connected. But Sergeant Super told the Jacksonville Journal the day Rebecca went missing, they had no evidence to connect all of the victims to the same suspect. It wasn't until 3 years later, a man fishing off of Fort George Island near the mouth of the St. Johns River stumbled upon a child's remains.
You can see where the police vehicles are, and right over here is where her remains were found.
Sergeant Jansen says her remains were skeletal by then, and there was no definitive indication of how she died. But dental records confirmed it was Rebecca Green. Out of the 5 girls missing, hers and Virginia Helm's bodies would be the only ones ever found. But in looking at Rebecca's case file, Sergeant Jansen found something he never expected.
The detective felt compelled to actually cut off some of her hair from the actual skull and seal it up in this plastic container.
This hair will be sent for testing to see if there is any DNA that can be lifted off of the hair.
If the suspect in this case had handled her head in any way, shape, or form in the act of committing this murder, would there be DNA remaining?
A major find in a 4-decade-old case. Only time will tell, though, if this could be the key to helping solve Rebecca's murder. But are the disappearances connected? That question continues to plague investigators more than 4 decades later. After Rebecca was taken, the disappearances stopped. Detectives never definitively linked all of the vanishings together, but they won't rule it out either. Many of their families are still waiting for justice. No matter what, though, those girls deserve to never be forgotten in the public's memory. Their names were Jeannie, Annette, Millette, Virginia, and Rebecca, the girls that disappeared in the summer of '74. It is like trying to put together the pieces of a complicated puzzle more than 40 years later. Sergeant Jansen says he can't say for sure if it was the handiwork of one person, but he wouldn't discount it either.
That many girls missing, that short of a time frame, you really have to start paying attention to what's going on. And they're all in the same age range, you know. We're getting some descriptions. The suspects in some of the cases are white males, you know. So you have to start putting these pieces together.
All similar victim types, Caucasian girls between the ages of 6 and 12. Jean, Virginia, and Rebecca all walking to the store alone when they vanished. Annette and Millette disappeared from their home. 5 girls in 3 months. In the original articles of the Jacksonville Journal, police told reporters they didn't have anything to connect the disappearances. But even the lead detective on the first case, Jeannie Schoen's disappearance, on the final page of the reports, makes a mention of the other girls that went missing after Jeannie, not directly linking the 5 vanishings, but making sure that any detective that reinvestigates Jeannie's case knows about the others. In the 1970s, there were several serial killers that moved through the Northeast Florida area. Killers like Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, Ted Bundy, and Paul John Knowles. Sergeant Jansen says they've made sure their DNA is in the CODIS system to be run against any DNA found on the old evidence.
We're hoping that, cracking the case on one of them might help us with all the other ones.
But after Rebecca disappeared, the vanishings of little girls stopped in the Jacksonville area. With 5 girls gone in 3 months, it begs the question, why did it suddenly stop?
Whoever was doing this, if it's a single person, probably felt like it was time to get out of town.
By the time Virginia and Rebecca went missing, the disappearances were front-page headlines in Jacksonville. Parents were on alert. The city was tense. Sadly, there would be no answers for those families. Sergeant Jansen says in looking back on these cases, his team has to keep an open mind. It could be one person or multiple people. They are partnering with Project Cold Case to give surviving family members an answer. Even if no arrest is made, these girls deserve to not be forgotten in the public's memory. Jean, Annette, Millette, Virginia, and Rebecca, the girls that vanished in the summer of '74. There is a fascination around cold cases, whether it be Hollywood shows or podcasts. There's just something about cold cases that draws in the public's imagination. But remember, behind every true crime is a family waiting for answers. And that's why we wanted to profile some of those cases today. For more, you can go to firstcoastnews.com and check our Unsolved Stories tab. If you know anything that could help solve these or any other case that's out there, please call Crime Stoppers at 1-866-845-TIPS or call your local law enforcement. Even if you feel that it's just a small piece of information you know, I guarantee investigators want to hear it. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Katie Jeffries with photographer Jeff Renfro, and please remember, if you know anything, please come forward. Thank you, and good night.